So federalism is kind of the shared power between both the state and federal government. Okay, so what is this idea of power, or even like the shared power? Well, this is everything from who bears responsibility of like maybe building roads, maintaining infrastructure, as well as running the government. Okay, so in the United States, we use this method, and it was kind of established by the U.S. Constitution. Okay, specifically what the powers of the federal government and the powers of the state. We're going to kind of focus specifically on Article 1 of the Constitution. Okay. Article 1 of the Constitution. So let's take a look at all of the powers that are kind of listed in Article 1. That is the best circle ever. All of the powers listed in Article 1 of the Constitution. So what I want you guys to do is, in a separate tab from your notes, I want you to look up Article 1, Section 8, and go through and read through Section 8. I'll give you about 3 to 4 minutes. And I want you to look through all the powers that Congress has, okay, that our legislative branch has, all the powers of our legislative branch. These are all powers listed in the Constitution. So just even do like a quick Google search, Article 1, Section 8, and read through Section 8. And I want you to kind of identify some of the things that Congress can do. Take a moment, read through them, and then we'll kind of talk about it as a class. I want you to try to identify 2 to 3 powers. We'll come back about 7:55. So try to look at Article 1, Section 8 and come up with a couple powers that Congress has, 2 to 3. Okay, so one of the powers is to raise and support armies. I like that. What does that mean, raise and support? Could that mean train armies?
Yeah.
Ms. Jensen. So regulate commerce. Ms. Jensen, what is commerce? Okay, commerce is specifically referring to trade. I love how they talk about like Indian nations, and this is almost like they're sovereign nations. Okay, so even before like we've kind of set up reservations, they've kind of made this idea that it's kind of the power of the federal government to deal with sovereign Indian nations. Okay, so I like that. Okay, nice answer. I like that. Okay, let's go. Lucy, give me a power. Okay, lay and collect taxes. This is the number one. I love this. Okay, so the power of the federal government is to lay and collect taxes. So why does the federal government have collect taxes? What do they use this for?
Public services?
Yes, they use this money for taxes, really to address the ideas to pay for the public needs.
Welfare, for example.
Yes. Okay, or even like social programs, okay?
Yeah.
Like Marcos was referring to, like welfare.
Yeah, or education.
Okay, education. That's really where a lot of this tax money is going, okay? Even as well as kind of raising support in Army to kind of pay for military.
Or even services such as construction.
Yes, okay, infrastructure when it comes to roads, that kind of thing. Good answer. I love that. Okay, let's go. Lucy, give me one more. To borrow money on the credit of the United States. Okay, this is a great one. Being able to borrow money from other countries, being able to work with other countries. Okay. All of the powers listed in Article 1, Section 8, these are called enumerated powers. Okay. So they're called enumerated powers because they're powers listed in the Constitution. They're explicitly listed in the Constitution. Okay. And these are powers given to Congress by the Constitution. Okay, so they're given by the Constitution. And they're explicitly given to Congress. Okay, so Congress has these powers. So are there things, so I'm going to post a question and I'll leave it open to anybody can answer. Are there powers that Congress has that are not listed? Okay, are there powers that Congress has that are not listed in the Constitution? Marcos, what do you think?
Perhaps.
Okay, perhaps. Okay, Engelbert, what do you think? Okay, so it's really not stated in the Constitution, but they have that power to kind of do that. So let's talk about for the idea of Air Force. Okay, we have this enumerated power in the Constitution to raise and support armies. Okay, was the Air Force around during the time of the Constitution Convention?
No, aviation wasn't around until the turn of the century.
Yeah, wasn't around until the turn of the century. Okay.
And even then, for warfare, it was a very, very limited. It was for a very limited usage. It wasn't until World War II that they became a mainstay in the military.
Okay. So how does Congress has the power to regulate the Air Force? How do they have the power to regulate that? Okay. So what I want you to do now is we're going to look at Article 1, Section 8, and the very last clause, which is Clause 18. I'll go ahead and I'll read it for you guys. It is to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States or in any department or officer thereof. Okay, so what does this mean? Let me give me 1 second, I'll kind of explain. I need a hair tie from somebody, just a hair tie. You have a hair tie? I'm gonna steal. Okay. So in the Constitution, we have these powers, right? These are enumerated powers. These are my fingers that are inside that hair tie, right? The Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, this is called the Necessary and Proper Clause. Okay. So what this is these are the powers that are kind of implied by the Constitution. So for example, Congress has the power to create a Army and Navy, right? But we don't have an Air Force, okay? But it's kind of implied by the Constitution. So what Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, the necessary and proper, to kind of maintain those armies, we need to create an Air Force. So what it does is it grows or it stretches the powers of the federal government. So to create an Air Force, they now have the power to do that. It's implied by the Constitution, okay? So remember, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 gives power to Congress to kind of increase their power to do all the things that are kind of listed or enumerated in the Constitution. Okay, so one of the couple of things we listed was to borrow money on the credit of the United States. Another power that Congress has is to print money or to coin money, right? So these are to print money, to coin money. These are my 2 fingers. Okay, can you print or coin money without a national bank?
No.
No. So it's kind of implied by the Constitution that you need a bank, but it's not specifically listed in the Constitution. So what the necessary and proper clause does is it stretches the power of the federal government, okay, of Congress, so that they can create a national bank. Okay, those powers are implied by the Constitution. Does anybody have any questions on this idea? Yes.
So is there a limit in which they can stretch the power?
This is debated. There's really no limit or even a check. Okay, the idea behind it is Congress is supposed to check themselves. When creating a bill, you need to have a simple majority for it to pass. Okay, from either the House or the Senate. Now the issue is if Congress is exercising so much power, or say the House of Representatives is creating a bill or committing an action that has so much power, the Senate is supposed to be able to check it, and vice versa. If they are doing things that are kind of outside their scope of work, a check that the Supreme Court has on Congress is they can deem what Congress is doing as unconstitutional, okay, making it kind of null and void, which the only really power to stop this power of the elastic clause is the Supreme Court, okay, or Congress itself.
A form of checks and balances.
Yes. Does that make sense? Okay, awesome. Thank you for letting me borrow your okay. So Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, often referred to as the necessary and proper clause. I'm spelling it wrong. Oh my gosh. Okay, it's called the necessary and proper clause. Or the elastic clause. Why elastic clause? Because it stretches the power of the federal government.
Or gives them flexibility necessary.
Yes. Okay.
Necessary and what?
Proper. Okay. With Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, these are called, remember, the implied powers. Because they are implied by the Constitution. They're not directly listed in the Constitution, but they are implied. The two examples I gave was the Air Force and creating a national bank. Any questions? Okay, so all of these things kind of go into, let me redraw that. Kind of go into this area, and that's kind of your federal powers. Okay, these are the kind of the things that the federal government can do. So let's now take a look at our second square, or our second circle, sorry. And these are the state powers. Okay, where does the states gain power in the Constitution? Where does the states gain power? Very first and foremost. Okay, we're going to look at the 10th Amendment. So go ahead and switch over your screen and look at the 10th Amendment. And whoever wants to read it for me, they're more than happy to. Just raise your hand when you have it. Jake, I see you got it up. You want to read it for me?
The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by the states are reserved to the states, respectively, for the people.
Okay, the state powers, and all other powers not delegated to the national government are reserved for the state. So this 10th Amendment gives states the powers to do pretty much everything that Congress can't. Okay, all other powers not delegated or enumerated in the Constitution or listed. Enumerated is just a term for numbered, are then given to states. These are called reserved powers. Okay, reserved powers. So some of the powers of the state, one of the very first reserved powers is somewhere you're sitting, and that is regulating education. Okay. Another reserved power is to grant licenses. Next one would be to provide local leadership. Okay, to set up towns, municipalities. Police and fire protection.
Well, let's use self-assess for short.
Yeah. Okay, these are all kind of powers that the states has. They're not listed in the Constitution, or they're not implied by the Constitution. They're then reserved for the state. These are your reserved powers.
It also is stated in the Ninth Amendment, I believe. The Ninth Amendment more specifically talks about the individual people who have their own liberties.
Individual people, yes. Where the 10th Amendment is more of the states' rights, the 9th Amendment is about individual rights.
And these amendments are known as the undocumented, the unenumerated rights. Those
Yes.
are not listed in the Constitution given to the people in the state.
Yep. Okay. So, the question I have for you guys is, can Congress tell a state what to do? Can we pass a federal law? Is federal law more important than state law? Okay. Are federal laws more important than state laws? Taylor, what do you think?
I guess it depends on what the laws are, but I think states should be able to individually put their own laws just based on what the people need. And the federal government doesn't always necessarily know like those individual needs of people. That's why there's smaller denominations.
Okay. I like that because it's kind of like what Brutus was saying, that we're so vast in territory that it'd be hard for a federal government to really kind of oversee that.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that, using the Brutus argument. I like that, good concept. Andrew, what do you think?
And I think about along the same lines, because like the federal government has like a lot of target training, like it's over a whole nation. They can't see the individual people, but the states has like a small area that's like over, so they can see the needs of the people.
Okay, I like that. I like that. Okay, we're going to really look at and how to answer this question. Both solid answers. Nice job, Andrew. I like that. To really answer this question, we're going to look at Article 6, VI, Article 6, and Paragraph 2. Also known as the Supremacy Clause. Okay.
Article 6, Section 2.
Yeah, Section 2, Paragraph 2. Article 6, yeah. Okay. I put paragraph, apologize for that, Section 2. Article 6, Section 2. Okay, otherwise known as the Supremacy Clause. Okay, I'll read it for you. This Constitution and the laws of the United States shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby. Anything in the Constitution or laws of any kind. Okay, so what does this really mean, this whole idea of the Supremacy Clause? It means that the supreme law of the land is the U.S. Constitution. Now, does that mean that federal law is more important than the U.S. Constitution? No. Okay. The judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything of the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. Okay. So that means if a state passes a law that it kind of violates the Constitution, okay, this gives really power to the Supreme Court to deem it unconstitutional. What would be an example of where a state passed a law and the Supreme Court has deemed it unconstitutional? Or even like a state, yes.
How did they get the anti-federalists to agree with
The Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights was kind of one of the biggest pushes by the anti-federalists. Okay, they needed a protection of individual or states' rights. So the Bill of Rights were originally created as protections from the federal government, not the states.
But now it's an important document to the government.
It's kind of opposite now, where they're more of protections from the state governments instead of the federal government. We've seen that specifically on what states do, right? When it comes to legal search and seizure or Second Amendment rights, those kind of things. The original intent of the Bill of Rights was supposed to be protections from the federal government, and that's kind of why there was really that big debate. The anti-federalists really needed a strong protection of rights. The Bill of Rights comes from a document that was actually proposed by one of the greatest anti-federalists, and that was George Mason, right? And that's the Virginia Declaration of Rights. It was passed in Virginia, Marcos, can I please finish? And it was adopted by the Bill of Rights. George Mason later proposed it in constitutional, like the first congressional meeting.
I think a good example.
Make sure you use your cards, Marcos. Okay.
I think a good example that about the state conflicting with national law will have to be segregation during the 60s with African Americans.
Yes, segregation. Okay.
The biggest one will have to be the Rockwell High School march, in which that the government, in which that the state National Guard have been ordered to prevent black students from going to school, and that in turn, this forced Lyndon B. Johnson to command the U.S. forces to protect the students.
Okay, good.
And this is just a small taste of what had happened during that decade that also have run into conflict with state and national power.
Yeah. So segregation is a good one.
Yeah.
So what would be an example in your guys' lifetime? Something that's happened in your lifetime where a state law was deemed unconstitutional and pretty much changed the whole dynamic of the country. Okay, and one of the biggest cases of your guys' lifetime was a case of Obergefell v. Hodges. Okay, Obergefell v. Hodges really utilized the idea of the Supremacy Clause, specifically the 14th Amendment. So go ahead and let's go to the 14th Amendment real quick. Okay, 14th Amendment, the very first line of the 14th Amendment is kind of just really about naturalization to become a citizen of the United States. But the biggest part of it is really this protection of individual rights. Okay, in the 14th Amendment, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges and immunities of the citizens of the United States. nor shall any state deprive any person. Okay, and this is where we kind of go back to that idea of life, liberty, and property without due process of law, no, nor deny any of its persons within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the law. So let's take a look at this idea of life, liberty, and property. Okay, it came up again and again in the Constitution. We see this. Okay. Okay. In the case of Obergefell v. Hodges, you had a same-sex couple who was where it was illegal to they couldn't get, were not granted a marriage license in their state. Because remember, one of the powers, state powers, reserve powers, was to grant licenses. They were not granted a marriage license. So they went to a different state and got married. Okay. When they returned home to their, kind of their place of origin or their home state, their state did not recognize their marriage.
Yeah, what am I supposed to put down on the 14th Amendment again?
Life, liberty, and property. Okay, or you can put the due process clause. So their state was not recognizing their marriage. Okay, so the problem lies not with the fact that the state didn't recognize their marriage, but insurance agencies, benefits, so employer benefits, okay, and all of the benefits of being married were not recognized. Now, marriage is not just a piece of paper. It's more of, there's a lot of a legal analysis that goes with it. If you're married to somebody, you can provide health insurance for them. You can claim them on your taxes. You can buy a home with them. You can do all of these things. But if your state isn't recognizing your marriage and one of the partners dies, what happens to the other one? Do they get those benefits? The insurance agencies were saying, no, we don't have to give you these benefits because we don't recognize your marriage. Okay. Is this a conflict of the due process clause of the 14th Amendment of life, liberty, and property? Yes. Okay. In a 5-4 decision, okay, there's actually 4 different dissents. The Supreme Court ruled that denying, oh, I spelled deny today. So denying someone or denying same-sex couples the right to marry was a violation of the 14th Amendment. Okay, thereby making same-sex marriage legal in all 50 states, because all of those laws that were legal, or all of those laws against gay marriage or not issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples, they were deemed unconstitutional using the Supremacy Clause, because if it's unconstitutional, states can't do it, right? Using the Supremacy Clause in the 14th Amendment, it showed that denying someone a marriage license is a denying them that due process, that life, liberty, and property. Okay. Any questions on that concept? So the state can deny state, or the federal government can kind of deny state powers, okay, and withhold state powers. Yes.
They took their case to the Supreme Court.
They did.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
They had to wait.
What was that?
If it is like a Supreme Court case, I imagine they have to wait like several years.
Yes.
Yeah, and this was not the first time we saw prejudice with the LGBT community. Think about the AIDS epidemic with the AIDS.
Yeah. Yeah. Harvey Milk, those areas. Yeah. Couldn't even run for Congress. And he finally did. Haley.
Yeah.
Yes. Loving v. Virginia. Us being able to marry a white and African American, different race intermarrying. That was illegal in most states to have two different races marrying each other. Okay, so in Loving v. Virginia, the Supreme Court ruled that this is kind of depriving people of this concept of life, liberty, and property, that you should be able to marry whoever you want, right? Yes.
So to which extent we define liberty?
Liberty is this idea of true freedom. Okay. Okay. Liberty is that concept of freedom, right? That nobody can really tell you what you can and cannot do, right? Specifically when it comes to marriage or race, you can't really discriminate because those are basic human rights. Life, liberty, and property are human rights. Okay, everybody has this concept of being free and born free, that we can't be born into slavery and indentured servant. That liberty is the true characteristic of what freedom stands for. Okay, being able to be true and live a unrestricted life. Yes.
What happens if you're a criminal?
What happens if you're a criminal?
Yeah, if you're like
Your
restricting the liberty.
your basic human rights are taken away. There's been quite a push in the judicial and the prison systems to change this, because obviously, do criminals have the right to freedom of speech? Not really. Can they own a gun? Not really. Basic human rights, like we can't waterboard, we can't do any of these kind of things anymore. So there's really been a push in the last 20 years to give inmates or people that are incarcerated more individual freedoms or basic human rights.
Exactly. You take someone's freedom, you take freedom.
Yes.
That's, and it's a tough thing to do.
Yeah. The idea of capital or corporal or capital punishment, this concept has been debated since the early 50s. Should the death penalty be, something today? Do you take someone's life because they took somebody else's life? Now, the idea behind it, would you rape a rapist? Someone that's committed rape. So why would we murder a murderer?
Depends on the case.
That's the hard thing. And it's more of that ethics versus legality.
The Eighth Amendment especially is the problem.
Yes.
I remember, so the Boston bomber, the Massachusetts doesn't have the death penalty, so they decided that, well, he deserves it. So instead of, they can't sentence him to death in Massachusetts, so they're going to send him to some other state that has death penalty.
So federal law, can they persecute him for murder on a federal charge
Yes.
as an act of terror? Yes. So you say someone commits murder, right? They can be prosecuted both on the state level and the federal level. Okay. So if that state doesn't have it, the federal government could have capital punishment. Okay? And it's really this idea of ethics versus legality. Ethically speaking, it's hard to make that decision because, would you rape a rapist? So why do we murder a murderer? Kind of concept.
Depends on the case. If the person has like a psychological condition.
Yeah.
It's
In the United States, we have the highest incarceration rate per population out of every other world or out of every other nation.
Late 90s.
Yeah, it's so bad. We're the highest incarceration rate. Haley.
Well, I personally think that the death penalty, I think it's needed because there are just really extreme cases, but I think it should be like more of a last resort, because there are cases, where someone, they were framed or something, there's cases like that, and it's hard to, really determine that, so I think it should be like more of a last resort.
Yeah. And when we get into the Supreme Court and Article 3 of the Constitution, we'll really dive in deep to this stuff. So, but for the most part, that is pretty much everything I wanted to talk about today. It was just this idea of the shared powers between the state and the federal government. Does anybody have any questions?